The Zalorians, an advanced alien race, had been watching Earth for centuries, but something about this planet intrigued them more than any other they had encountered. Unlike the countless worlds they had conquered, Earth seemed different. The Zalorians were known across the galaxy for their unmatched technology and military might. Their ships could wipe out entire fleets, and their weapons could tear apart the most durable armor. Yet, Earth, a small and seemingly defenseless world, had never been attacked, never been invaded. The aliens had heard stories of this planet's weakness. They had heard that Earth was an easy target. But, as the Zalorians observed, doubts began to creep into their minds. What was it that kept this world untouched? It was Commander Talrak, leader of the Zalorian fleet, who first brought up the question during their quiet hours in deep space. Standing on the bridge of his ship, he gazed out into the endless blackness of space, his eyes fixed on Earth. His crew, a group of the finest Zalorian minds, worked silently at their consoles, scanning the planet below. Talrak had led countless successful conquests across the stars, and every mission had ended in victory. But Earth was different. He could feel it. Why has no one ever attacked this world? Talrak asked, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. A young officer, Lieutenant Veris, was the first to speak. Commander, all the data points to one thing. Earth appears defenseless. They have no advanced weapons, no hyper-advanced technology. The humans are still stuck in the Stone Age compared to us. She gestured at the holographic screens, showing human military tech, which looked almost primitive next to the Zalorians' high-tech equipment. They are not a threat. We could invade in an instant, but we haven't, Talrak replied sharply. And that's what bothers me. Why hasn't anyone else attempted to conquer this planet? He turned to his second-in-command, Admiral Kroll. What do you think? Kroll's face was stern, his eyes narrowed. It doesn't make sense. A planet like Earth, weak in technology and resources, would be ripe for the taking. Yet, no one has ever made a move. There's something we're missing. A silence filled the bridge. Talrak paced slowly, lost in thought. The more he thought about it, the more intrigued he became. Earth had been isolated from the larger galactic community, and yet, no alien force had ever touched it. There had to be a reason that went beyond what they could see with their advanced scanners. Perhaps, Talrak muttered to himself. It's time to find out what makes Earth special. He turned back to his crew. Prepare the stealth ships. I want a full, covert surveillance operation. Let's get a closer look at Earth and its inhabitants. We will discover what makes this world so invulnerable. The command was given, and the fleet immediately went to work. For days, the Zalorian ships moved closer to Earth, staying hidden in the shadows of space. They remained undetected, their advanced cloaking technology making them invisible to human radar and sensors. The aliens watched and waited. At first, there was nothing extraordinary. Earth's surface appeared to be a chaotic mix of civilizations, natural disasters, and struggle. Humanity was primitive in many ways. Cities crumbled under the weight of war, and the planet itself seemed to be on the brink of environmental collapse. It was clear to the Zalorians that humans had not yet mastered the technologies of space travel or intergalactic warfare. The planet was beautiful, yes, but it was a mess, much like any young civilization. However, as the Zalorians watched more closely, something unusual began to surface. The aliens had initially assumed Earth's struggles were signs of weakness. Wars, natural disasters, poverty. This was a planet teetering on the edge. But over time, the Zalorians began to notice something strange. Despite the overwhelming challenges, Earth's inhabitants never gave up. In fact, they seemed to fight harder as the odds grew steeper. The Zalorians had watched Earth for days, and now they were starting to see it. Humanity's resilience. They observed humans during their most desperate moments. During a terrible earthquake, they saw people rushing to save each other, pushing aside their differences to help those in need. The Zalorians watched as humans pulled together, uniting across borders, across races, and across cultures. In the face of overwhelming disaster, humans didn't retreat, they fought back. They didn't have the advanced weapons of the Zalorians, but they had something more powerful: determination. Even the most brutal wars on Earth were filled with human soldiers, who fought not just for survival but for something deeper: their families, their homes, their freedom. Commander Talrak couldn't believe what he was seeing. He watched as humans rebuilt after being devastated by natural disasters, creating new cities out of the rubble, finding new ways to survive. They were not giving up. They were not backing down. The Zalorian officer, Lieutenant Veris, turned to the commander. "We've underestimated them," she said quietly. "These humans, they may not have the technology, but they have something far stronger. They have heart." Talrak nodded slowly. "Yes, Heart. This is no ordinary planet. As the observation continued, Talrak felt a sense of unease. His fleet had faced enemies across the galaxy, but never had they encountered a species that fought with such passion. What if Earth wasn't as vulnerable as it appeared? What if this planet had something that made it unconquerable? The more the Zalorians watched, the more questions piled up. There was something about Earth that defied their understanding. The commander was now more certain than ever. There was something about this world that had kept it safe from all the other galactic invaders, that as night fell, the alien ships remained in the shadows of space, their cloaks hiding them from Earth's eyes. Talrak sat back in his chair, staring at the planet below. He had thought the mission would be simple and easy conquest, but now he wasn't so sure. Something had changed. The mystery of Earth had only just begun, and the Zalorians, despite their power and knowledge, were about to learn that this planet was not as defenseless as it seemed. It was a world that would fight back, no matter the odds. The question remained, what would they do next? The Zalorians had spent days observing Earth from the shadows of space, and now the time had come for their first real test. Commander Talrak, standing alone on the bridge of his flagship, watched Earth below through the massive viewport. His mind was a whirl of thoughts, most of them focused on the one question that had consumed him since they first began their surveillance. Why hadn't anyone ever attacked Earth? The planet was small, seemingly primitive, and vulnerable. Yet, there was something about it, something that had kept it safe from the eyes of the galaxy's many conquerors. Now, the Zalorians were about to find out why. After careful deliberation, Talrak ordered the fleet to deploy a small team of scouts. They would go down to the surface, make contact with the planet, and see if they could uncover what made Earth so special. These scouts, though highly advanced, would remain cloaked, invisible to human radar and sensors. The mission was simple: observe and gather data. Without being detected, a sense of anticipation filled the air as the Zalorian ships moved silently through space, approaching Earth with calculated precision. In the quiet of the ship's command room, Lieutenant Varys reviewed the plans. She was one of the most skilled officers in the fleet, and although her confidence was usually unshakable, today was different. This planet, this place, seemed to hold a mystery that made even the most experienced Zalorian uneasy. The small scout ships launched, gliding silently through the atmosphere. As they descended, the crew could hear nothing but the soft hum of their vessels. There was no immediate danger, no alarms, nothing to suggest that Earth had any real defense. The planet seemed peaceful from above, quiet, serene. It almost seemed too easy. The scouts had been given instructions to land quietly in a remote area, away from any major population centers, but still, they couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. As the ships touched down in a dense forest, the first sign of Earth's defenselessness became clear. The air was thick with humidity, the trees towering over the scouts as they disembarked. The environment was unfamiliar and harsh, filled with strange creatures and plants that the Zalorians had never encountered. Yet, it wasn't the alien wildlife that concerned them, it was the quiet. For a planet that was supposedly weak, Earth certainly felt alive. The energy in the air was different from any other planet they had encountered. It was almost as if the world itself was watching them. With every step, the scouts felt the weight of something they couldn't quite understand, something that made their powerful technology feel suddenly small. The first human they encountered was a young woman, walking alone through the forest. She didn't seem to notice the Zalorian scouts as they moved through the trees. She wore no armor, no advanced weaponry, just a simple outfit that looked entirely ordinary to the aliens. And yet, there was something about her. As she passed by, one of the scouts, a young officer named Zoran, felt a strange pull toward her. It wasn't just her appearance, it was her presence, the way she moved, the way she carried herself. She wasn't afraid. Zoran watched as she paused by a stream, dipping her hands into the water to wash them. The other scouts were preoccupied with gathering data, but Zoran couldn't take his eyes off her. She was like a beacon of calm in the midst of the unknown. And then, something happened that startled him. The woman, without any apparent reason, looked up toward the trees, directly in their direction. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, time seemed to slow. Zoran froze. He had never felt anything like this before. How had she sensed him? How had she known they were there? No human should have been able to detect their cloaked ships, let alone notice an alien presence hidden among the trees. The woman didn't scream, didn't run, or reach for a weapon. Instead, she smiled, a knowing look crossing her face. She simply nodded as though acknowledging something that Zoran couldn't comprehend. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the forest. Zoran stood there, unable to move. Something had shifted in him, something deep inside. His mind raced with questions. How, why? How could a human be so calm in the face of something so unknown, so powerful? What was it about this planet that made its people so different? Meanwhile, Commander Talrak's mind was racing as well. He had received reports from the scouts, and although nothing seemed outwardly dangerous, there was an unsettling sense of confusion in the data they had gathered. The humans, despite being technologically inferior, different, there was a strange energy about them that the Zalorians couldn't quite place. It was as though these humans had an innate ability to adapt, to survive, and perhaps most strangely of all, to perceive things that they shouldn't be able to. Talrak ordered the scouts to continue their mission, but a part of him was already rethinking their approach. The more they watched Earth, the more questions they had. The more they tried to understand, the more they were left in the dark. Every time they thought they had figured it out, another mystery emerged. The next day, the scouts observed a group of humans working together in a makeshift camp. They were using basic tools and resources, yet they were building something extraordinary, an elaborate defense structure, quickly and efficiently. The Zalorians couldn't believe their eyes. These humans, with no advanced technology, were creating complex fortifications in a matter of hours. The ingenuity, the resourcefulness, the willpower to survive it was all on display. Talrak's unease deepened. These weren't just weak, defenseless creatures. These were survivors. Every time the Zalorians thought they had found weakness, they found strength instead. Every time they expected failure, they saw success. Earth wasn't just a planet to conquer, it was a planet to be reckoned with. And the humans weren't the only ones realizing it. The Zalorians were starting to understand that they weren't as invincible as they thought. By the time the scouts returned to their ship, they were no longer so sure of their mission. Earth was not what it seemed, and as the Zalorian fleet prepared for the next phase of their operation, Talrak couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect for the strange, unpredictable world below. It wasn't just Earth that was dangerous, it was the people of Earth. And now, the question was not whether they could conquer it, but whether they should. The mystery had only just begun. The Zalorian fleet hovered silently above Earth, the vast expanse of space offering an eerie stillness to the commanders and officers aboard the flagship. Commander Talrak's mind had been consumed by the mystery of this planet. Why had no one ever attempted to conquer Earth? What was it about this small, seemingly primitive world that had left it untouched for so long? It had been weeks since the first reconnaissance mission, and still, the answer eluded him. The more the Zalorians watched, the more the truth about Earth's resilience started to unfold, layer by layer. But this was no ordinary planet. The humans whom the Zalorians had assumed to be vulnerable and weak were beginning to reveal something far deeper, something far more complex than mere survival. Talrak had expected humanity's response to be one of fear, panic, or submission, but what he saw was different. The more the Zalorians observed Earth's population, the more they began to understand Earth's greatest strength was not its military technology or its sheer numbers. It was the unpredictability of its people. The Zalorians had thought they were dealing with a planet of simple creatures, easy to understand and even easier to defeat. But Earth was unlike any planet they had encountered. Its history was filled with war, suffering, and tragedy. But each time, humanity found a way to rebuild, to adapt, and to survive. The Zalorians observed countless stories of human ingenuity, how people from all corners of the planet had come together during times of crisis, often achieving what seemed impossible. In one part of the world, a group of humans, caught in the middle of a natural disaster, used their limited resources to form an organized rescue effort. They didn't just sit back and wait for help, they became the help. They built makeshift shelters, saved those trapped in wreckage, and coordinated efforts to rebuild. To the Zalorians, this was astonishing. These humans were not simply surviving, they were thriving in the face of adversity. But it wasn't just the large-scale efforts that caught the Zalorians' attention. They began to observe smaller, subtler acts of humanity's resilience. In a war-torn city, a young child with nothing but a broken toy and a tattered blanket refused to give up hope. In the midst of destruction, he kept playing, pretending that the world around him was still full of possibilities. His innocence, his belief in something better, struck a chord deep within the Zalorian scouts. It was in moments like these that the true nature of Earth's spirit became clear, no matter the odds. Humans refused to accept defeat. Commander Talrak stood on the bridge, staring at the images of Earth that filled the room's massive holographic screens. He wasn't sure if he was witnessing humanity's strength or its greatest weakness. What if they were wrong? What if this planet couldn't be defeated not because it lacked power, but because the humans would never stop fighting? Talrak wasn't used to uncertainty. He was a leader, a conqueror, trained to make quick, decisive moves. But Earth was something else entirely. It was like trying to predict the weather. Its movements were chaotic, unpredictable, and beyond the scope of Zalorian logic. The more the Zalorians observed, the more they saw that Earth was unconquerable in ways they hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about military strength or technology. The humans fought with something far deeper, something the Zalorians couldn't measure with their advanced scanners or instruments: willpower. In another part of the world, Talrak watched a group of human soldiers. They were facing an enemy far more technologically advanced than themselves, yet instead of retreating, they held their ground. They used their environment, taking advantage of the terrain. Using guerrilla tactics, and somehow, they managed to inflict significant damage to the invaders. The Zalorians had never seen anything like it before. How were they doing it? How could these creatures with such limited technology stand up to an enemy so powerful? The answer was simple. They didn't care how powerful their enemy was. They just kept fighting. They didn't stop because they couldn't win. They fought because they had to. As the days passed, Talrak began to notice a disturbing trend in the data they were collecting. Despite all the advanced technology and superior weaponry the Zalorians possessed, they were failing to comprehend Earth's greatest strength: its people. The humans had a way of making the impossible seem possible. They found a way to endure, even in the darkest of times. One of the most startling observations came when the Zalorians witnessed a mass protest in a city, where people stood united, chanting for peace, equality, and justice. The humans had no weapons to fight back against oppressive forces, yet their numbers and determination were enough to challenge the very systems that sought to control them. The Zalorians had studied countless civilizations, but none of them had ever shown this kind of resistance. In the face of oppression, the humans didn't crumble, they rose. Talrak found himself pacing the bridge, unable to shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. What was it about Earth that made it so unyielding? The more the Zalorians observed, the more they realized that Earth's strength came not from the things they could see: ships, weapons, and technology, but from something far more elusive: belief. The humans believed in each other. They believed in their planet. They believed in something greater than themselves, something that could not be measured by the cold, calculating logic of the Zalorians. They believed in their ability to endure, no matter the cost. Commander Talrak stared at the planet below. What was he seeing? A planet that should have been easy to conquer was turning out to be the most difficult challenge of his entire career. The more the Zalorians learned about Earth, the more questions they had, and the more they realized that conquering this world would not be as simple as they had once assumed. As the fleet prepared for the next phase of their mission, Talrak couldn't help but feel a rising sense of respect for the planet below. Earth was a world of chaos, of destruction, and of pain, but it was also a world of unrelenting survival. Every time the Zalorians thought they had it figured out, they were left staring at a new mystery, a new lesson about humanity's strength. They had underestimated Earth, they had underestimated its people, and now Talrak wasn't sure what they should do next. For the first time in his life, the commander found himself questioning everything he knew about war, about strength, and about survival. One thing was certain: Earth was not the defenseless world they had once thought it to be. It was something far more dangerous and far more powerful than any of them had ever imagined, and they were only just beginning to understand why. The Zalorian fleet loomed in the cold silence of space, its ships invisible against the backdrop of the infinite stars. Commander Talrak sat alone in the command room, staring at the massive holographic display of Earth. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on his shoulders. The mystery of this planet was no longer something that could be solved through observation alone. It was time to test Earth's defenses. It was time to see just how defenseless this world really was. Talrak knew that the Zalorian fleet could easily overpower Earth's military. Their weapons were far more advanced than anything humans had at their disposal. A few well-placed strikes would cripple the planet's defenses in an instant. But the more he thought about it, the more the commander realized that brute force might not be the answer. Earth was unlike any other planet they had encountered, and if they were going to conquer it, they needed to understand what truly made it tick. In the quiet of the command room, Talrak gave the order. The first strike would not be one of destruction, but one of testing. He decided to send a fleet of cloaked drones disguised as meteorites into Earth's atmosphere. The goal wasn't to annihilate, but to provoke, to see how Earth's inhabitants would respond to something that was not only unknown but dangerous. The drones were designed to cause minor but widespread damage, triggering panic and confusion, but not enough to push the planet into full-scale war. Talrak watched as the drones launched, disappearing into the vastness of space. As they re-entered Earth's atmosphere, their cloaking mechanisms activated, making them invisible to human eyes. The drones streaked across the sky, their descent creating a storm of chaos. From the surface, no one saw them coming. The first drone landed in a remote part of the ocean, causing a small explosion that sent waves crashing against nearby coastlines. The second struck a forest in a rural region, igniting a fire that began to spread rapidly. A third and fourth targeted major cities, causing massive electrical outages and disrupting communications. The human response was immediate, but it was not what Talrak had expected. The chaos spread quickly across Earth, but instead of crumbling under the weight of the attacks, humanity reacted with a fury that took the Zalorians by surprise. What they had expected to be a moment of fear, confusion, and submission turned into something entirely different. People didn't run, they didn't hide, they fought. Talrak watched the human response unfold in real time, his heart pounding with growing astonishment. A group of soldiers from a nearby city scrambled to set up a defense against the fires and explosions. They weren't prepared, but they were determined. Without advanced technology or enough resources, they used the natural terrain, building makeshift barriers and using whatever they could to protect their homes. Even civilians, in the face of overwhelming odds, banded together to help the soldiers. It was as if they instinctively knew that they couldn't rely on anyone but themselves. As the attacks continued, Talrak watched a local rescue team, equipped with nothing more than fire trucks and emergency supplies, rush to evacuate civilians from the areas that had been hit the hardest. There were no powerful weapons, no armored vehicles, just ordinary people working together to save one another. In the midst of chaos, there was order, born not from technology, but from the human will to survive. The response was not just tactically, it was heartfelt. People were willing to sacrifice their lives for the greater good, and it left Talrak speechless. The Zalorians had watched hundreds of other species on countless worlds, but never had they seen a race respond in this way. Humans had no advanced weapons to repel the invasion, no sophisticated drones or high-tech defenses, but they had something far more a deep, unbreakable bond to each other and to the world they lived on. As the hours passed, Talrak and his officers watched the humans adapt. They didn't just try to stop the destruction, they sought to understand it. Engineers and scientists scrambled to analyze the strange meteorite-like drones, using nothing but basic tools and a little ingenuity. They reverse-engineered the tech of the drones, turning it into a method of defense. In a matter of hours, they developed a crude but effective countermeasure, allowing them to disable the drones before they could cause more damage. The more the Zalorians observed, the more they realized that Earth's true strength lay not in its military might, but in the depth of its people's spirit. Humans didn't have the luxury of advanced technology, yet they used the one thing that seemed to matter more, their determination. They fought not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They fought for their homes, for their loved ones, for their future. Commander Talrak was left with more questions than answers. He had expected to find weakness, but instead, he found resolve. He had expected fear, but instead, he saw defiance. The humans were not just surviving, they were adapting faster than the Zalorians could anticipate. He turned to his officers, his mind whirling. "They're not what we thought," Talrak said quietly. His voice was filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "These humans, they don't just fight to survive. They fight because they believe. They believe in each other. They believe in their world." The officer next to him, Lieutenant Veris, spoke up, her voice uncertain. "Commander, we've underestimated them. Their response wasn't just survival instinct, it was strategic. They've turned this attack into an opportunity to unite." Talrak nodded slowly. "Exactly. They didn't just defend themselves, they used the chaos to show what they're truly capable of. And the more we provoke them, the stronger they'll become." It was then that Talrak realized what they were dealing with. Earth was not a defenseless world, it was a world where, no matter the odds, the people would always rise to meet the challenge. The Zalorians had expected a planet ripe for the taking. What they had found was a world filled with fighters who didn't need advanced technology, but only their will to survive and protect those they loved. Talrak's gaze remained fixed on the holographic screens. The more he observed, the more he came to understand that the true power of Earth lay not in its weapons, but in the strength of its people. And that was something the Zalorians could never have predicted. As the drones were neutralized one by one, Talrak couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect for the humans. They weren't the weak, defenseless creatures they had once thought. They were something else entirely, a species that fought no matter what. And it was this, above all, that made Earth an enemy unlike any other. The Zalorian fleet hovered just outside Earth's orbit, its ships cloaked and invisible. Commander Talrak stared at the planet below, a mixture of awe and frustration swirling in his chest. For weeks, his fleet had been observing the humans, probing for weakness, testing their defenses. What had started as a simple reconnaissance mission had evolved into something much more complicated. These humans, so far from the heights of galactic technology, had proven to be far more than what the Zolorians had anticipated. They were unpredictable, and the unpredictability of a species was something that the Zolorians had never fully understood. Talrak had expected Earth to fall into chaos, to panic, to be overwhelmed by the force of his fleet, but instead, every time they struck, they found a world united, a people who, despite their flaws, fought with an intensity that defied the Zolorians' logic. They adapted, they survived, and now they were beginning to fight back. It was time for the next phase. The Zolorians had spent weeks testing Earth's resolve, but now it was no longer about proving the planet's strength, it was about seeing how far they could push. Talrak had ordered the deployment of an assault fleet, large, visible, and powerful. They would attack Earth directly, using overwhelming force, hoping to break the will of humanity once and for all. This time there would be no more testing. It would be a full-scale invasion. The Zolorians released their massive warships into Earth's atmosphere, breaking through the clouds with a terrifying force. From the surface, it was as if the sky itself had torn open. Brilliant flashes of light filled the sky as the alien ships descended. Cities across the world were suddenly bathed in the light of their arrival, and the people below, who had once thought they were safe, now understood the true meaning of the word invasion. Yet, once again, Talrak was left in disbelief. The humans didn't panic. They didn't scatter or flee. Instead, they rose to the challenge in a way that defied the Zolorians' understanding. All over the planet, defense systems were activated, military forces mobilized, and civilians, those who had no experience with warfare, came together to form an organized resistance. There was no central command, no single leader pulling the strings. It was the will of the people that began to shape their response. In the midst of the chaos, Talrak watched as human forces began to use the terrain to their advantage. Cities that the Zolorians had thought vulnerable became fortresses. Military personnel, though outgunned and outnumbered, made use of every available resource. They created makeshift weapons, repurposed old technology, and built defenses on the fly. Even in the most rural areas, where there were no official military forces, civilians grabbed whatever they could, tools, vehicles, anything, and organized themselves into small guerrilla groups. Commander Talrak sat in stunned silence, his eyes glued to the holographic displays that showed the full extent of the human resistance. They were not just fighting back, they were adapting faster than the Zolorians had anticipated. The humans, it seemed, were capable of turning every disaster, every obstacle, into an opportunity. One of the most startling moments came when the Zolorians launched a direct assault on a major city. The alien ships unleashed their destructive power, obliterating buildings and infrastructure in an instant. Yet, as the dust settled, something incredible happened. The human survivors, those who had managed to avoid the initial wave of destruction, came together. They didn't wait for orders. They didn't wait for help. They simply moved. People from all walks of life, from scientists to street vendors, found a way to band together and begin clearing rubble, saving survivors, and fighting back against the alien invaders. Talrak was astonished. These humans, these seemingly defenseless beings, didn't just run or hide. They adapted. They learned, and they found ways to fight back. The alien assault on the city didn't just cause destruction, it sparked a fire. The humans, despite being outmatched technologically, had something the Zolorians hadn't expected: creativity. As the battle raged on, the Zolorians witnessed the humans' ability to think on their feet. Where the Zolorians had expected confusion and fear, they found strategic maneuvers. The humans used their limited resources to develop weapons that could disable the alien ships. They created electromagnetic pulses, small devices that interfered with the Zolorians' advanced technology. It was a simple tactic, yet highly effective. The humans, though technologically inferior, had used their environment, their ingenuity, and their resilience to create a form of resistance that the Zolorians could not have predicted. And then came the most surprising development. The human forces didn't just fight back, they began to spread. The resistance movement grew exponentially as more and more people joined in. Talrak watched as cities, once thought to be lost, began to reclaim ground. The human desire to protect their homes, their families, and their future became a driving force that spread across the globe. Governments, once fractured and divided, now found themselves working together, pooling resources and knowledge to combat the invaders. Even nations that had once been at odds found common ground in the face of this unprecedented threat. It wasn't just the military that fought back. The civilians, those without weapons or formal training, had become a key part of the resistance. They gathered intelligence, sabotaged alien equipment, and rallied their communities. The invasion had awakened something within the human spirit, a collective will to fight that transcended borders, ideologies, and differences. Talrak began to understand the true nature of the humans' strength. It wasn't their technology, their weapons, or their numbers, it was their unity. The Zalorians had underestimated the power of a species united by a common cause. In the face of overwhelming odds, the humans didn't break. They didn't falter. They came together, not just to fight, but to win. As the days passed, Talrak's disbelief turned into admiration. The humans had shown him something that no other species had ever demonstrated: the sheer power of resilience. No matter how many times they were knocked down, they stood back up. The more the Zalorians tried to crush them, the more the humans fought back. They had spirit, something no weapon, no technology, no alien force could destroy. Commander Talrak had never encountered an enemy like this. The Zalorians had always relied on their superior technology and strategy to crush any resistance. But the humans had shown him that true power wasn't always about strength. Sometimes, it was about survival, about finding a way to stand tall when everything seemed to be falling apart. As the battle continued, Talrak realized that Earth would not fall easily, not without an immense cost. The humans had more to them than anyone had ever guessed. And as the Zalorian fleet prepared for what would surely be their toughest battle yet, the commander knew one thing for sure: the true war had only just begun. The battle had raged for weeks now, and Commander Talrak sat in a darkened command room aboard his flagship, his eyes fixed on the screens that displayed the chaos unfolding below. The Zalorian forces had struck with overwhelming force, expecting to break Earth's resistance in a matter of days. Instead, they were met with relentless defiance. The humans, seemingly defenseless and primitive, had turned out to be something entirely different: a force of nature, unpredictable and fierce, driven by a will to survive that the Zalorians could barely comprehend. Talrak had watched as cities were leveled, and military bases were overwhelmed, only for the survivors to regroup and fight back with a kind of ingenuity and determination that left him in awe. Humans didn't simply retaliate, they adapted, evolved in real time, finding new ways to counter the alien threat. And each time the Zalorians thought they had the upper hand, the humans found a way to turn the tide. The invasion had not gone as Talrak had planned. He had underestimated Earth's ability to unify in the face of such overwhelming odds. The more his fleet pressed the attack, the more the humans seemed to rise. They were a force of chaos and creativity, turning every disadvantage into an advantage, every failure into a learning experience. What should have been a simple conquest had turned into something much more complicated: a battle for survival that the Zalorians had never faced before. It wasn't just the strength of humanity's resistance that unsettled Talrak, it was the unpredictability of it. The humans were wild, like a storm that couldn't be tamed. They had no central leadership, no unified military force capable of matching the Zalorians' might. Yet, somehow, they were winning. There was no logic to it. There was no explanation other than the unyielding determination of the human spirit. A message came through, pulling Talrak from his thoughts. It was a transmission from Lieutenant Varys, who had been monitoring the human forces closely. She sounded almost breathless, her voice laced with urgency. "Commander, you need to see this," Varys said. "The humans have found something. We've been watching their response to our latest assault, and it's unlike anything we've seen before." Talrak's fingers hovered over the control panel, and he brought up the transmission. On the screen, images flickered, shots of human soldiers and civilians working together in the heart of a battle-ravaged city. But it wasn't the soldiers that caught his attention, it was the way the humans were using their environment. The Zalorians had thought their attacks would force the humans into submission, but instead, Earth's inhabitants were harnessing the destruction. They were using the very wreckage of their cities and the debris left by the alien strikes to build their own weapons and fortifications. There were civilians wielding crude tools, dismantling wrecked alien drones and turning them into makeshift armor and shields. There were engineers working feverishly to adapt alien technology, repurposing it for Earth's defense. In the midst of all the chaos, there was a strange kind of order, an order that was born not from formal leadership but from the shared will of the people. Talrak watched in stunned silence as a group of civilians, who had no weapons, formed a blockade, using whatever materials they could find to stop a Zalorian assault vehicle. It was almost laughable in its simplicity, yet the blockade held, forcing the alien vehicle to retreat. Talrak's mind raced as he processed what he was seeing. These humans, these seemingly primitive creatures, had a resilience that no force in the galaxy had ever encountered. They didn't just fight to survive, they fought with purpose. How are they doing this? Talrak muttered under his breath. How are they so resourceful? The answer came from Varys, who appeared on the screen beside him. It's not just their technology, Commander, it's their spirit. Every time we strike, they grow more determined. They don't just resist, they fight with everything they have. They adapt faster than we can plan. The more we push them, the stronger they become. Talrak ran his hand over his face, his mind spinning. It was clear now that Earth's strength wasn't just physical, it was mental. The humans had an innate ability to persevere, to keep moving forward even when the odds were stacked against them. It wasn't something that could be destroyed by technology or weapons. It was something that ran deep in their blood, in their culture, in their very nature. But the commander wasn't one to give up so easily. He knew the Zalorians had the advantage. They had better technology, better firepower, and superior strategic planning. They could crush Earth's resistance if they chose to, but that came at a cost. Talrak wasn't willing to waste his fleet and resources on a prolonged war, not when the outcome was still uncertain. He needed to find a way to break humanity's will, to make them understand the futility of their resistance. He turned to Varys. Deploy the final phase. Let's end this. We will hit them hard on all fronts. I want to break them. Varys hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. Understood, Commander. But I warn you, these humans, they won't give up. I'm beginning to think they might never stop fighting. Talrak's eyes hardened. We'll see about that. As the Zalorian fleet prepared for the next phase of their assault, the commander knew that something had changed. This was no longer just about conquering Earth. It was about proving a point, proving that the Zalorians were the dominant force in the galaxy, that no species could stand against them. But the more Talrak thought about it, the more he realized that Earth's resistance wasn't just a test for the humans, it was a test for the Zalorians too. The invasion had forced the Zalorians to confront something they had never considered, the possibility of defeat. No matter how powerful their ships or weapons were, no matter how many drones or soldiers they deployed, they couldn't break the human spirit, and that was something the Zalorians had never had to deal with before. Talrak was starting to understand that defeating Earth wasn't just about superior firepower. It was about something much deeper, fundamental clash of values, of beliefs, and that was something the Zalorians couldn't win with just technology. The fleet began its descent toward Earth, the final phase of the invasion underway. But for the first time in his career, Talrak wasn't certain of the outcome. The Zalorian fleet hovered just above Earth's atmosphere, the massive ships looming ominously against the sky. For weeks now, Commander Talrak had watched humanity's resistance grow stronger with each passing day. He had underestimated them, dismissed them as weak, and now, his entire invasion strategy was on the verge of collapse. The humans, with their crude technology and primitive tools, had outlasted every attempt to break their will. They fought not just with weapons, but with something far more powerful, an unyielding, relentless spirit. As Talrak gazed down at the planet below, he couldn't help but feel a growing respect for the humans. They had proven him wrong at every turn. Each time the Zalorians thought they had broken them, the humans rose again. They had no single leader to unite them, no overwhelming force to wield, yet they managed to band together, to adapt, and to fight back with a ferocity that defied all logic. Now, Talrak stood at a crossroads. His fleet had bombarded Earth with everything they had. Cities had been reduced to rubble, governments had crumbled, and entire populations had been displaced. The human resistance was strong, but it was beginning to feel the strain of an unrelenting war. There were signs of exhaustion, food and medical supplies were running low. Infrastructure was in shambles, and morale was beginning to falter. The Zalorians had expected this. It was only a matter of time before the humans would surrender, wouldn't it? Yet, in the midst of it all, something strange happened. The humans didn't surrender. They didn't quit. In fact, they were evolving once more, finding new ways to push back against the invaders. Talrak watched as a small band of survivors, armed with nothing but scavenged weapons and makeshift tools, ambushed a much larger group of Zalorian soldiers. The humans didn't have the advantage of numbers or firepower, but what they lacked in strength, they made up for in sheer determination. It wasn't just military tactics that had changed. It was the human mentality. As the days wore on, they grew more united, more resourceful. The once fragmented human nations had set aside their differences, forming alliances in the face of a common enemy. Scientists shared knowledge, engineers pooled resources, and ordinary civilians became soldiers, protecting their homes, their families, their way of life. The human response was no longer just about survival. It was about resisting, about refusing to let the Zalorians take what was theirs. Commander Talrak couldn't deny it any longer. Earth wasn't just a planet to conquer. It was a force of nature, and the humans were the storm. As the final phase of the Zalorian assault began, Talrak knew that this would be the last push. The humans were weary, their cities destroyed, their infrastructure crumbling. The Zalorians had them cornered. But for the first time in this campaign, Talrak felt an uneasy knot in his stomach. There was something different about this fight. The humans weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. Despite the overwhelming odds, the humans had managed to hold on. They had not only repelled every attack, but had started pushing back, reclaiming territory they had lost, even as their world was torn apart. Talrak couldn't help but wonder, how could a species with so little do so much? Was it simply their will to survive, or was there something more? In the midst of this thought, a transmission came through. It was from Lieutenant Veris, and her voice was unlike any Talrak had ever heard, filled with urgency and shock. "Commander," she said, "the humans, they're doing something we never anticipated. They found a way to communicate with us." Talrak's mind raced. Communicate? After everything that had happened, after all the destruction, was this an attempt to negotiate surrender? He was about to order the fleet to intensify their bombardment when Veris continued, her words almost too difficult to believe. "They've sent us a message, Commander, directly to our fleet. It's not a plea for mercy. It's not a surrender. It's not a surrender. A declaration, a declaration." Talrak echoed. "Of what? They've chosen to fight to the end." Talrak was silent for a moment, trying to process what he was hearing. Earth's response wasn't one of submission. It was the opposite. It was a challenge. The humans, against all odds, had not only withstood the Zalorian onslaught, they had taken the fight directly to the invaders. As the message played on his screen, Talrak watched a human leader, surrounded by survivors and fighters, standing in front of a banner that had been hastily stitched together from torn fabric. The message was simple, yet it struck Talrak to his core. "We fight because we can't stop. We fight because this is ours, and we will never let you take it." The words echoed in his mind, over and over again. The Zalorians had assumed that their superiority would crush the humans, but instead, the humans had given them something they had never faced, a resolve that couldn't be broken. In that moment, Talrak realized that the humans weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for freedom. They had no intention of being subjugated. Their hearts burned with an intensity that made them unstoppable. The more the Zalorians pushed, the more the humans pushed back, until the very idea of defeat became unimaginable to them. Talrak knew the fleet had no choice but to retreat. The humans had proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they could not be broken. But as the decision was made, a strange sense of respect filled the commander's chest. He had come here to conquer, but now, as the Zalorian fleet turned its ships away from Earth's orbit, Talrak understood something profound. This planet, this race of seemingly fragile beings, had taught him a lesson that no other species could have. Strength is not only about power, it is about spirit. And Earth, against all odds, had shown that the human spirit was stronger than anything the Zalorians could ever have imagined. As the fleet withdrew, Talrak couldn't help but wonder what would become of Earth. The humans had survived. They had won, and as the stars of the galaxy twinkled above him, the commander knew that this world would never be conquered. Not by the Zalorians, and not by any other force in the universe. Earth, with all its flaws and chaos, had proven one thing: it was undefeated.